in West Africa. All right, where's my toilet paper? Called the Bambouti, Bambhouti. Your book calls them pygmies, but I understand that's like a non-PC term. But they're a tribe, they're an ethnic group in Africa that tend to be 5 feet or under. And they have low growth hormone and low IGF-1. So not clinical conditions, but again, showing the importance of growth hormone and IGF-1. If they're both high, you tend to be tall. If either one is low, you tend to be smaller. Yeah?
So how would you distinguish the difference between like these groups of people and then like gigantism or
Because one, I think gigantic, well, one, the giants, as you'll see, are much bigger than the Maasai. But two, they're characterized by extremely high levels of growth hormone. I mean, much higher than the people who have the, quote, natural condition. And also, they're usually associated with a pituitary tumor or something like that. So for gigantism, for hypopituitary dwarfism, they're usually associated with some clinical problem with the pituitary so that it's not making growth hormone. So they have much lower clinically. And there's a graph in your book that actually compares Bambouti to people with hypopituitary dwarfism. And in the case of the Laron dwarfism, there's actually a mutation. There's a picture in your book, too, that shows a family, I think in Mexico, of like where, because it's a recessive gene, and they show some of the family members have it and some of them don't. Okay. Oh yeah, we'll get through you. We'll barely get through you. So after you're born, this is what's happening. In terms of how growth hormone is regulating your growth. Then some people, not all people, and actually there's an ethnic association. Some people experience something called adrenarche. Arche means the start of, and adrenal refers to your adrenal gland. Some people experience something called adrenarche. Not everybody does. With adrenarche, you get a growth spurt. Because androstenedione from your adrenal glands, and nobody knows how it starts or why it happens, but androstenedione from your adrenal glands, converted into estrogen, stimulates the growth hormone axis, primarily through growth hormone. And girls usually experience it earlier than boys. That's why there's that awkward time when the girls in the classroom were taller than, well, I don't know if it's awkward, but it was awkward when I was always short, so I guess. I'm like Bambouti. Adrenarche is also associated with pubarche, which again, not all people experience. Pubarche means the start of the pubes. Pubarche is when you grow your axillary or your armpit hair and your pubic hair. Not everybody experiences. In fact, some people never grow armpit hair or pubic hair. So not everybody experiences adrenarche or pubic hair. Well, you're getting all confused. Trust me. Some people never actually grow armpit hair or pubic hair. But these two things are not associated with puberty. And nobody knows, well, pubarche is caused by adrenarche. But what stimulates or what starts adrenarche, nobody knows. I don't think anybody cares or studies that. Puberty is different. Puberty is when you start to produce gametes. That's how it's defined. That's how I'm defining it in class. I know there's like Tanner staging, where they measure your breast growth and all that kind of stuff to figure out. But puberty is by definition the start of producing mature gametes. And what controls the start of puberty has been studied mostly in girls. I think one for quite two reasons. One is there probably greater consequences, for example, getting your period and things like that, at least in this culture, well, maybe in all cultures. And two, because I think it's more obvious. Like I know exactly when my daughter reached puberty. I have no idea when my son reached puberty. Because when you have your period, you know that you're making mature gametes. I don't think anybody really knows when boys actually reach puberty, because how would you know? Puberty is associated with one is there's a growth spurt. And there's a growth spurt because if you're a girl, estrogen stimulates the growth hormone axis. And for boys, testosterone converted to estradiol in the brain and pituitary stimulates the growth hormone axis. So there's a growth spurt at puberty in both. We're good. I love the arrows. You guys love it.
You said testosterone in both the pituitary and the hypothalamus.
In the brain and pituitary. Testosterone doesn't do a whole lot on its own. It's usually converted to something else. So the growth spurt in both boys and girls is stimulated by estradiol. In girls, it's directly by the estradiol that's being secreted by the ovary as you approach puberty. In boys, it's the testosterone converted to estradiol in the brain and pituitary. So in both, there's an increase in growth. In boys, facial hair, and if you haven't gone through adrenarche, that would also include axillary and pubic hair, armpit hair. Girls, there's also an increase in axillary and pubic hair. I'm going to write this one up here. It also interacts with the shafts of the hair of your head and can change. Both of my kids had like Asian thin straight hair until they reached puberty. Then they got all curly and thick. So we can actually change the texture of your hair. The voice deepens in boys, and to some extent in girls. More pronounced in boys, obviously. This is all mostly due to testosterone. Oops, that's good. You know what I meant. Your sebaceous glands, you know what that is? The acne. Oh, it was sebaceous glands. No, that's not what I meant. Increased acne is androgen dependent. If you're look at that. I'm 48 years old, I'm still getting zits. It's right in the middle though, I'm trying to make it a fashion statement like one of those bagel head people in Japan. But those glands are androgen dependent, so the testosterone that's also coming out of the ovary is also responsible for acne. So that's an androgen dependent. In fact, everything on the board right now is androgen dependent. There's an increase in libido, also androgen dependent. Those are things that boys and girls share in common. Can I erase this? For boys, there's also sperm production. And increased muscle mass. For girls, and this part is all estrogen dependent. Menarche is the start of your menstrual period. That's of course associated with gamete production. Increased breast growth, so there is some growth of the ducts and the ovular part of the breast, but also you start to accumulate fat in the breast. Most of the size of the breast pre-pregnancy is fat. Does not reflect your capacity to feed. We're good? So now the question is, what controls the onset of puberty? Can I erase this? If you guys see this. Your book lists what they call 3 hypotheses. It's a little bit outdated. One they call the missing link. And the missing link was the idea, based on experiments, where if you take the ovaries from a prepubescent rodent, or some other animal of your choice, and put them in an adult female, the ovaries will cycle. So the ovaries are ready at any time. I'll say that again. If you take the ovaries from a prepubescent animal and put them in a sexually mature animal, the ovaries will cycle and function. If you take the pituitary, the anterior pituitary, from a prepubescent animal and put them in a sexually mature animal, the pituitary will cycle and function. So the missing link theory, for what it's worth, says there's something missing at the hypothalamus or above. The pituitary of an infant is ready to cycle. The ovary of an infant is ready to cycle. But something at the hypothalamus or above is missing. The gonadostat hypothesis is similar to what happens in the follicular phase, but more long-term. The gonadostat hypothesis says that the hypothalamus and pituitary have a lower threshold for negative feedback. Higher threshold for negative feedback. I.e., there's no negative feedback. There's removal of negative feedback. And it says that the ovary, independent of the pituitary, as you're developing, gradually starts to release estradiol until it reaches enough estradiol that there's a positive feedback and it turns on the HPG. So it's very similar to ideas of the follicular phase. That the ovary kind of leaks estradiol as you're growing up, and then eventually it makes enough estradiol that there's a positive feedback and it turns on the HPG. I guess the fat hypothesis yeah.
Sorry, is it in the gonad state that hypothalamus in the what?
So the gonadostat hypothesis says that there is no negative feedback, and gradually the ovary releases more and more estrogen to the point that there's enough estrogen that there's a positive feedback effect. It's the same thing as a way to describe follicular phase.
Okay.
So you reach enough estrogen, it's probably not true, that you turn on the HPG. The fat, I don't know if that's what it's called, I'm going to call it a fat hypothesis. The fat hypothesis is in part based on the following. Girls who have very low body fat tend to go through puberty later. Either if you're anorexic, or in the case of my daughter, if you're like an extreme athlete and you just have low body fat, you go through puberty earlier. Whereas if you're overweight, you go through, later. If you have low fat, you go through puberty later. Whereas if you're overweight, you tend to go through puberty earlier. And that's because fat expresses aromatase that's regulated very differently from the placenta and the ovary. Completely different promoter. And so what this idea says is that as you accumulate enough fat to be reproductive, your fat turns on your HPG because it's making estradiol. In other words, independent of your ovaries, it says that your fat makes this estrogen, and when you accumulate enough fat, you'll go into puberty. Now, what was discovered after your book was written, what was discovered after I started teaching this class, is that fat also makes leptin. Remember I told you about leptin? And so the missing link may be a combination of this estradiol. And remember, leptin doesn't bind directly to the GnRH neurons. Leptin binds to neurons that then affect GnRH. Does that all make sense? So probably what's really happening is that as you accumulate enough fat, it's making both estradiol, we can have a quote positive feedback effect on the HPG. And this leptin, which regulates GnRH directly, is probably also involved in turning on the HPG. It's saying, especially if you're a female, it's saying, yeah, you have enough fat now that stores that you can afford the nutrients to reproduce. Questions or comments? And then I have a little slideshow for you. Then I'll have to see an officer for questions.
Repeat what you just said, as you accumulate enough fat.
So as you accumulate enough, and it's particularly true for females, right? Because you have to not only maintain yourself if you're still growing, you gotta grow a whole baby. You gotta make milk. So this is saying that you won't go through puberty. You won't become reproductively active until your body knows, right? And I'm personifying the hormones, but you know what I mean. Until your body knows that you have enough fat. And there's signals from the fat, including estradiol and leptin, that will turn on the HPG. If you have a very low body fat mass, then you won't go through menses, you'll go through puberty much later. The age of puberty is actually changing still. It used to be 12 to 13 for girls. The average age of puberty now is down to 8, and there's a huge racial difference. So black and Hispanic girls tend to go through puberty earlier. And the numbers, I don't want to misquote, up to, for black girls now, up to 10% show signs of puberty at age 4, and by age 8, 50% of black girls show signs of puberty. And some of the people think that's the difference between black girls tend to have more body fat, but it also may be associated with nutrition availability and also certain contaminants that mimic estrogen. There's a large number of studies that are looking into contaminants that are involved. Yeah.
So you're saying that if you don't have the same amount of body fat as someone else, you will go into puberty later, but still you have to go through puberty eventually, right? Even if you.
Well, I guess you don't have to. If you were completely anorexic and starved, you may never go through puberty, right? But typically, at some point, presumably, because if you didn't evolutionarily, it'd be pretty tough for us to be around. At some point, you accumulate enough fat that then you trigger, your body's triggered to activate the HPG. Yeah. So the missing link, all the missing link says is that the ovary of an infant and the anterior pituitary infant will cycle if you put it in an adult. So it says that what's holding you back from puberty is something above the pituitary, a hypothalamus or above. And what that likely is either estrogen from the fat that turns the whole thing on, or the leptin, which turns on the GnRH pulse generator. Yeah.
Why don't women have beards?
You can tell me. I will answer you this way. Women with PCOS do develop and grow facial hair.
So is it a testosterone type thing?
It is a testosterone type thing, but I'll let you ponder it. There are a couple things. There are a couple things I want to share with you guys before. There's things that I either forgot, or like I said, people always want to look at these things. So we talked earlier about the Olympic star. There's an XY individual with AIS, Semenya. So she competed in the Olympics, and I guess now they changed the rules that she can now compete as a woman. So this is the person from South Africa, of Zulu descent, that I use as my evidence that Shaka Zulu was also an AIS individual. And this is, I guess they tried to dress her up for some magazine. And this is, remember I showed you Paula? When my students have babies, I feel like a granddad. So she's literally, I was walking her today, so she's about 3 months old now, she's doing really well. Anyway, I just want to show you that. She just sent me that report. And then I have some stats. This is the tallest man that ever lived. This is a guy who was 8'11". So he was like 1 foot, did I say 9 before? Yeah. So he was like, see, that's why I wrote it down, so I can check. So he was like 1 foot shorter than the basketball thing, but he could reach up and dunk. I don't know what he played basketball. This is now the tallest woman. She was like 7'11", and she died, I think, a year or two ago. But she was the tallest woman alive. This is the tallest man alive. He is 7'9", and here from China. And here he is also with the smallest man alive, also from China, who's only 1 foot 7 inches tall. And these are Maasai. There's a couple pictures I just took from the internet. And again, their average height, I think, tends to be like 7 feet. And they do this ceremonial dance where they jump and things like that. And they also are, they live very traditionally. So they're actually, they herd cattle, but they don't actually eat the cattle. They mostly eat a mixture of like blood and milk from the cattle. And they live in the sort of the border of Kenya and Tanzania. And these are the Babuti, which are from Central Africa to West Africa, which tend to be under 5 feet. So these are the ones with the low growth hormone and low IGF-1. And somebody always asks me who's the youngest girl to ever get pregnant. So here she is. She was in Peru, and I'm reading this because I don't want to give you incorrect. The earliest birth, she gave birth when she was 5 years old. She started menstruating when she was 8 months old. She had regular periods by the time she was 3 years old. She got pregnant at age 4 and gave birth at age 5. She's still alive. There's a book written about her. But I think her son died. I forget who he died from. And the father was apparently her father. And which leads me to one of my PSA statements. So apparently 30% of all girls and supposedly 15% of boys are sexually molested. 90% apparently occur by a family member or a close family member. And I think that's something that you as future doctors and social workers, and public health workers, and parents and people should be aware of, that basically 1 in 3 of you have had that type of experience, and for the rest of us to try to understand how to make that better for everybody, like I said before. Also, one other thing I think we should think about is how we treat the cases differently. Supposedly, the rate for boys is 15%, it's half. But it's probably because it's underreported. One, because if it happens to another man, it's more shameful thing that you shouldn't report. But one other thing, and this came up last year, that I think we're all sensitive to, is an 8-year-old girl who died in Yemen after a wedding night with her husband. I think it's something that we all respond to. But then there are other cases like this one. Here's a guy, Chris Brown, says he lost his virginity at 8, and I think this news story, which came out actually about the same week, so it got a very different response because it's kind of cool. Oh, it's like a macho thing that he lost his virginity at age 8. But when you think about it, I don't know if you know Chris Brown, but when you think about his poor interactions with women and poor interactions with people of the opposite sex, it's very typical of people who were abused at that age. But somehow we think that this is kind of a cool thing that he brags about, rather than recognizing that it's also child abuse. So I'll see you in office hours on tomorrow, and we'll go from there.